So continuing my series going over budget weapon builds for Arena Breakout Infinite, we have a weapon that may give you the best stats you can possibly get in the entirety of the game for a budget weapon. And this weapon is going to cost a little under 200,000 without a sight. So if you use a cheap sight, you could get this around 200,000. And this is going to be a budget build for the MCX. So with this budget build, we have 96 vertical recoil, 98 horizontal recoil, meaning this basically doesn't have recoil. You can't really get much better than that in this game. So pretty much no recoil at all. 75 ergo. It'll go down a little bit depending on your sight. And that is with a 30 rounder. So a little bit less with a 60 rounder and a sight. The ergo is still crazy even with those. And 52 weapon stability. All of that put together in this weapon stats are just absolutely ridiculous. Now the big downside with an MCX in general, and this is no matter what this build is that it only has a 30 effective range. So you're not going to be able to use this at much longer ranges. Most of the other full assault rifles have a much higher effective range, but with the stats this thing has, and if you just play around and not trying to fight people at super long ranges, this weapon is absolutely ridiculous for the price. And going into the build, you don't actually do a ton to this weapon. So your pistol grip, you don't change at all. Your stock, you only have two options and you're just going to use the MCX modern stock. It does also come with the front and rear sights that give more ergo, which is nice. So those are already on it. If you want to save a little bit and you don't say already have an MCX in your stash or something, you can take these front and rear sights off. They're incredibly cheap though. They're under 1,000 a piece. If you want to save as much as possible, you could take those off to save a little bit. Then you're using the MCX standard charging handle. You don't have any other options for that as well. Now for a sight, like I mentioned, the price of this does not have a sight on it and it's a little under 200,000. So with the sight, especially depending on which one you're going to be buying, can be a bit above that. But since you're really not going to be using this at super long ranges, I would generally recommend just like hollow sights or red dot sights or something like that. And those are generally cheaper than the much more longer range scopes. You can use whatever sight you want to. If you want to go as cheap as you kind of can with a decent sight, you can just use the compact sight rails and then you use the compact reflex sight on top of that. This is a pistol sight, but it's still pretty clean in general. And this can save you a lot when comparing to something like a hollow sight or something like that. It's going to be just a lot more expensive. And then for the handguard, you're going to be using the MCX tactical handguard. Then for your front grip, you're going to be using the RK6 front grip. You kind of have two options. You have the RCX or the vertical front grip. The vertical front grip gives it +1 horizontal recoil, but it costs more and it doesn't give the 6 weapon stability like the RK6 front grip. And I just think the RK6 is actually a lot better because of that weapon stability. So I'll generally recommend using that. You're probably not going to see like craziest of differences between them, but I'll definitely go with the RK6. Then for our muzzle devices, we're using the MCX muzzle flash suppressor. On that, you have the MCX suppressor. And that's pretty much all you're going to be doing. Now you do also have your magazine. You can use whatever magazine you want. If you want to keep it under 200,000 or right around there, you'll probably want to be using 30 rounders because the 60 rounders for 5.56 weapons are pretty expensive. Like if we go with the round one, it is much more expensive than a lot of other 50 or 60 rounders. It's almost 100K. So it's going to be a lot more expensive. And if you want to spend that extra amount, you can just do 160 rounder. The stick one should probably be a little bit cheaper, but you go with one of these 60 rounders and then you just get one additional 30. So if you ever need to reload, you can have that. I just usually go with like 3 30 rounders. They're much cheaper and you just have to play around them a little bit. But that brings us into our ammo. Now you have 3 white ammo, so you're not going to really use any of this. I know some people do use the HP, which is leg meta ammo. I don't really use any leg meta ammo in this game. I just don't think it's generally that good. So you really only have 3 options. You have M855, which is the tier 3 penning. And this is a tier 3 penning ammo that's just kind of right in the middle of everything else. Tier 3 penning, 50 base damage, really high initial muzzle velocity. 5.56 rounds are always going to be super accurate. Even though this isn't super good at longer ranges, you're still going to be able to hit stuff at longer ranges generally. 34 pen, 13 armor damage. So again, right down the middle, but M855 is usually on the more expensive side, usually averaging around 600 a round for tier 3 penning. But then you have what I would generally recommend, even though it is a little bit on the expensive side for tier 4 penning. That's M855A1, 47 base damage, still super high initial muzzle velocity, 40 pen, 20 armor damage. I think it's actually one of the better tier 4 penning rounds. It's just a bit more expensive on average than some of the other tier 4 penning rounds. I would generally recommend still using M855A1. You're saving so much with this weapon, and the stats on it are so crazy that you're not really going to be missing tons of these rounds anyway, and this will allow you to pretty easily fight anybody tier 5 armor and below. If you're going up against tier 6, you're not really going to pen it. And even though I generally recommend you don't use tier 5 penning with a budget weapon, if you want to put like a 6 year runner on this and maybe a better scope, you're basically close to the best build for this gun anyway. You could use M995. It's just absurdly expensive at close to 8k a round, but tier 5 penning, 41 base damage, crazy initial muzzle velocity, 52 pen, 27 armor damage. If you really want to use M995, you're going to shred anybody you're hitting, but I would generally recommend M855A1. But that is the entirety of this MCX budget build, and this is legitimately just one of the best budget builds in the game, especially if you want something that's a laser beam, because this, again, probably gives you the best stats possible for a weapon at this price point. The stats are ridiculous. Almost no other weapons you can even get to this good of stats, but like I mentioned, the one big downside is that it doesn't have the effective range of other ARs, but it's still going to be incredibly strong. Just make sure to play around that. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.